I discovered what Bigfoot really does with human bodies in the winter of 1997. And the truth is much scarier than any legend or campfire story could ever prepare you for. What I found in that cave in the mountains of Washington State changed everything I thought I knew about death, burials, and the creatures that share these forests with us. My name is David Thornton. I am a scientist who studies bones, and this is the story I was told never to share. But after 27 years of silence, the truth needs to come out. December 1997 was one of the coldest winters the Cascade Mountains had seen in a long time. Snow fell almost every day, covering the forests of central Washington in layers of white that made the old pine trees look like something from a Christmas card. But underneath that pretty scene, something dark was happening. I was 34 years old at the time, working as a bone expert for the state of Washington. My job was to study skeletons, help identify bodies, and figure out how they died. The kind of work that most people found scary, but I found interesting. I had worked on everything from old Native American graves to modern crimes. The call came on December 18, 1997. I was in my office at the University in Seattle when Detective Patricia Brennan from the Stevens County Sheriff's Department called. "Dr. Thornton, we need your help with something strange," she said, her voice sounding very stressed. "We have had 4 hikers go missing in the past 6 weeks in the Colville National Forest. All of them were experts in the outdoors. All of them disappeared without a trace." "I am sorry to hear that, Detective, but I study remains," I said carefully. "Have you found bodies?" "No, that is the problem. We've found their camps, their gear, and even their cars, but no bodies, no blood, no signs of a fight. It is like they just vanished into thin air." She paused. "But we did find something else. Tracks. Strange tracks near where each person went missing." I became interested even though I didn't want to be. "What kind of tracks?" "That is why I am calling you. They look human, but wrong. They are too big. The steps are too long, and they are always found near the places where people vanished. We need someone with your background to look at this with science. Tell us what we are dealing with." I should have said no. I had a lot of work to do, final tests to grade, and Christmas was a week away. But something in Detective Brennan's voice, a mix of frustration and real fear, made me agree. 2 days later, I was driving north on Highway 395. My Jeep Cherokee was loaded with gear, warm clothes, and enough supplies for a week in the mountains. The weather report called for more snow, but the sheriff's department said this could not wait. People were missing, and with each day that passed in the winter cold, the chances of finding them alive got smaller. I arrived in Colville, a small logging town of maybe 5,000 people, just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. The sheriff's department was a small building on Main Street, decorated with Christmas lights that did not seem to fit the sad work happening inside. Detective Brennan met me in the parking lot. She was in her mid-40s with short blonde hair and looked like someone who had spent years working outdoors. She shook my hand with a strong grip. "Dr. Thornton, thanks for coming so quickly. I know this is not your usual kind of case." "Call me David," I said. "And you are right. It is not, but I am interested. You mentioned strange tracks. Come inside. I will show you what we have." The meeting room walls were covered with maps, photos, and timelines. 4 faces stared at me from missing person posters. Gregory Chen, 29, disappeared November 9th. Michael Kowalski, 35, disappeared November 23rd. Rachel Foster, 31, disappeared December 5th. James Anderson, 42, disappeared December 12th. All experienced hikers, Brennan explained, pointing to each photo. Chen was a wilderness guide. Kowalski used to teach survival for the Army. Foster had climbed mountains in the Himalayas. Anderson was a park ranger with 15 years of experience. These were not new hikers who got lost. She pulled out a folder full of photos. These were taken at each place where someone disappeared. I studied the pictures carefully. They showed large footprints in snow and mud. They were clearly shaped like human feet with 5 toes, but they were huge, at least 16 inches long, maybe more. The distance between the steps showed that whatever made them walked upright, but took steps far longer than any normal human. Bigfoot tracks, I said, not trying to hide my doubt. Detective, you cannot seriously think— I don't know what to think, she interrupted. That is why you are here. But look at this. She pulled out another set of photos. These were taken at the place where Chen disappeared. See these marks in the snow? I looked closer. The photos showed what looked like drag marks leading from Chen's empty camp into the forest. Long parallel lines, as if something heavy had been pulled across the snow. Could be the victim trying to crawl, I suggested, though something about the shape didn't quite fit that idea. That is what we thought at first, but look at the distance. These marks go on for over 200 yards before they disappear into the thick forest. And there is no blood, David, not a drop. If someone crawled that far through snow with an injury bad enough to stop them from walking, there should be blood. She was right. I had worked on enough crime scenes to know that. What do the locals say? I asked. Brennan's face looked serious. That is the other thing. The older people in town, the loggers who have worked in these forests for decades, they won't go into that part of the Colville National Forest anymore. They say the area is cursed, that people who go in don't come out. They talk about— She hesitated. They talk about the guardian of the bones. Guardian of the bones? It is a local legend. It goes back to before the town was built. The Spokane and Kalispell tribes have stories about a creature that lives in the deepest parts of the forest. They say it collects the dead and takes them to a special place. They call it different names, but the meaning is the same. A being that guards the line between life and death. I sat back in my chair, thinking about this information. As a scientist, I didn't believe in legends or magical guardians, but 4 people were missing, and the clues suggested something strange was happening. What do you need from me? I asked. Tomorrow morning, we are sending a search team to the area where Anderson disappeared 6 days ago. It is the most recent site, and we are hoping there might still be clues that haven't been buried by snow. I want you there. I want your expert opinion on anything we find. I nodded. I will need to see the land and look at any physical clues myself. If there are remains, I can help identify them and maybe figure out what happened. Good. We leave at sunrise. Dress warm. It is supposed to be 15 degrees up there, and that is before the wind chill. That night, I stayed at a small motel on the edge of town. I couldn't sleep, my mind thinking about the facts of the case. 4 expert hikers missing, strange tracks, drag marks with no blood, and local legends about something that collected the dead. The logical part of my brain said there had to be a simple explanation. A predator, maybe a bear or mountain lion, though the tracks didn't match. A killer hiding in the mountains. Even some kind of accident or natural event we hadn't figured out yet. But another part of me, a part I usually kept buried under years of science training, whispered that maybe some legends existed for a reason. Maybe the old stories held bits of truth that modern people ignored. I finally fell asleep around 2 a.m., and my dreams were filled with snow-covered forests and massive footprints leading into darkness. The next morning, I met Detective Brennan and her search team at the Sheriff's Department at 6 a.m. There were 8 of us total. Brennan, myself, 2 deputies named Harris and Yamamoto, 2 experienced search and rescue volunteers named John Whitfield and Maria Santos, and 2 tracking dogs with their handler, an older man in his 60s named Earl Patterson. We drove in 2 vehicles for about 40 minutes into the mountains. The roads became more and more dangerous as we climbed higher. Snow fell steadily. Big flakes stuck to the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. Finally, we reached a small parking area where James Anderson's truck still sat, now covered in several inches of snow. Yellow police tape marked it as a crime scene, though the tape was sagging under the weight of ice. His camp was about 1.5 miles northeast of here, Brennan explained as we put on our gear. Last radio contact was December 12th at 4:30 p.m. He was reporting in for his daily check-in, said everything was fine. The weather was clear, and he would be hiking out the next morning. That was the last anyone heard from him. We set out into the forest, following the path Anderson would have taken. The dogs led the way, their breath visible in the freezing air. My science equipment felt heavy in my pack, and despite my layers of clothing, the cold was already getting through. The forest was strangely quiet. No birds, no sounds of small animals, just the crunch of our boots in the snow and our own breathing. Even the dogs seemed nervous, whining softly as they moved forward. After about 40 minutes of hiking, we reached Anderson's campsite. His tent was still standing, partly collapsed under snow, but not broken. His backpack was inside, along with his sleeping bag and supplies. His campfire pit showed signs of a fire that had been put out on purpose. "Something is wrong here," Earl Patterson said quietly, his hand on one of the tracking dogs. Both animals were whining, pulling backward on their leashes instead of searching forward. "Dogs don't want to go any further." Detective Brennan kneeled beside Anderson's tent, checking the entrance. No signs of a break-in, no blood, no sign of a struggle. It is like he just walked away from his camp and never came back. I moved around the edge of the site, looking for anything strange. My training had taught me to notice details that others might miss. The snow around the camp was mostly untouched, except for our own footprints and the leftovers of what might have been Anderson's movements. But then I noticed something. "Detective, come look at this," I called out. About 20 yards from the tent, partially filled with fresh snow but still visible, were tracks, large tracks, the same pattern I had seen in the photos back at the Sheriff's Department, shaped like a human foot but massive. Each print was at least 16 inches long. "Fresh?" Brennan asked, kneeling beside me. I checked how deep and clear the prints were. "Hard to say for sure with the snowfall, but I would guess these were made sometime in the last few days. See how the edges are still pretty sharp? If these were from 6 days ago when Anderson disappeared, they would be completely filled in by now. Deputy Harris, a young man in his 20s who looked very uncomfortable, spoke up. So whatever made these tracks has been back here since Anderson vanished. Possibly, I said, pulling out my camera to take pictures of the prints. I took measurements, photos from different angles, and made detailed notes. The length of the step was huge, nearly 6 feet between prints. Whatever made these tracks was either incredibly tall or taking very long steps on purpose. John Whitfield, one of the search and rescue volunteers, had been checking the tree line. Got more tracks over here. They lead northeast, deeper into the forest. We gathered around the new discovery. A clear trail of the massive footprints led away from the camp, heading into the thickest part of the forest, where the old pine trees stood like ancient guards. "Do we follow?" Deputy Yamamoto asked, her hand resting on her gun. Brennan looked at the sky. More snow was falling heavily now. "We have maybe 3 hours before we can't see anything. We follow the trail, but we stay together. Nobody separates from the group." Earl tried to get his dogs to move forward, but both animals refused to follow the tracks. They planted their feet, whining and pulling backward with surprising strength. "Never seen them act like this," Earl muttered. "These dogs have tracked through everything. Avalanche zones, bear territory, you name it. But they won't follow this trail." "Something has scared them bad. We go without the dogs, then," Brennan decided. "Earl, you and the dogs head back to the vehicles. If we are not back in 4 hours, call for more teams." Earl didn't argue. He looked relieved to have an excuse to leave. As we watched him and the dogs disappear back down the trail, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The 6 of us remaining, Brennan, Harris, Yamamoto, Whitfield, Santos, and myself, began following the massive footprints deeper into the forest. The tracks were clear and consistent, showing no signs of the creature trying to hide its trail. If anything, it seemed to want to be followed. We walked for nearly an hour, the forest growing darker and heavier despite the white snow covering everything. The trees here were older, more massive, their branches creating a roof that blocked much of the falling snow. The tracks led us through land that grew harder to cross, over fallen logs, across a frozen stream, up a steep hill. "Whatever made these tracks is strong," I observed, looking at where the footprints crossed the stream. "Look at how deep these marks are, even in frozen ground. I would guess we are looking at something that weighs at least 600 pounds. Maybe more. And it walks on 2 legs, Maria Santos added. She was an expert tracker, and I could see her professional interest taking over her fear. The walking pattern matches upright walking, not a bear on hind legs. This is something that walks upright naturally. Deputy Harris had grown very quiet, his face pale. "My grandfather used to tell stories about these woods," he said softly. "He was a Spokane tribal elder. He said there were places in the forest where the spirits take the dead to rest, places humans are not supposed to go." "Spirits don't leave footprints," Yamamoto said, but her voice didn't sound very sure. The tracks led us to a rocky cliff, a wall of rock that rose maybe 60 feet above the forest floor. The footprints went right up to the bottom of the cliff and then stopped. "That is impossible," Whitfield said, checking the area carefully. "The tracks just end. There is no sign of it climbing, no prints leading away in any other direction. It is like whatever made these tracks just vanished into the rock. I studied the cliff face, looking for any explanation, and that is when I noticed it. A narrow opening in the rock, partly hidden by hanging icicles and piled up snow. It was maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, easily missed if you weren't looking for it. "There," I said, pointing. "A cave entrance." We approached carefully. The opening was dark, and cold air seemed to flow out from it like breath. I pulled out my flashlight, and the others did the same. Our beams of light only went a short distance into the darkness before fading out. "We need to report this," Yamamoto said. "Call for backup before we go in there." Brennan pulled out her radio, but only static came through. No signal. "We are too deep in the mountains." She looked at each of us. "We vote. Do we go in now, or do we mark this spot and come back with more people and better equipment?" "Those people have been missing for weeks," I said. "If there is any chance they are in there, alive or not, we need to know. Every hour we wait in this cold reduces the chances of finding anything useful." Brennan nodded. "I agree, but we go carefully. Whitfield, Santos, you two stay here at the entrance. If we are not back in 1 hour, you head back and get help. The rest of us go in." The cave entrance forced us to crouch to enter, but after about 10 feet, it opened up enough to stand. Our flashlights revealed a natural tunnel. The walls were smooth stone carved by ancient water. The air was cold, but strangely still, without the wind we had been fighting outside. We moved forward slowly, our lights creating dancing shadows on the walls. The tunnel went down gradually, taking us deeper underground. After maybe 50 yards, it opened into a larger room, and that is when we smelled it. It wasn't the smell of rotting things. I had worked with enough remains to know that smell very well. This was something else, something natural, but not gross, almost sweet, mixed with earth, and something I couldn't quite name. "What is that?" Harris whispered. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think we are about to find out." The room got bigger in front of us, our flashlight beams barely reaching the walls. The floor sloped downward, and we could see that the tunnel continued deeper still. But what made us all freeze were the marks on the walls. Symbols, hundreds of them, carved into the stone. Not random scratches, but careful markings, shapes, spirals, and pictures. They covered every surface we could see, going down into the darkness below. "Someone has been here," Brennan said, stating the obvious. "Someone has been using this cave for a long time." We continued going down, following the tunnel as it turned deeper into the earth. The temperature was warmer here than outside, probably the same all year round at this depth. The symbols on the walls continued, becoming more detailed the deeper we went. Then the tunnel opened into a cave so large our flashlights couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls. The space felt enormous, like a giant church. And in the center of the cave, lit up by our lights, we saw something that made me scared. Structures. Someone had built things inside this cave. Not modern buildings, but something old and simple. Platforms made of stone and wood arranged in circles around what looked like a deep pit in the middle. And on those platforms, "Oh my God," Yamamoto whispered. Bodies. Human bodies arranged carefully on the stone platforms, but not recently dead. These were skeletons, some completely bare bone, others with dried skin still sticking to them. dozens of them, maybe more than 100. My training as a bone expert kicked in, taking over my shock. I moved forward carefully, my flashlight sweeping across the cave, noting what I was seeing, even as my mind struggled to understand it. "Nobody touch anything," I said, my voice echoing in the huge space. This is unlike anything I have ever seen." The remains were arranged with great care. Each body lay on its own stone platform, positioned to look peaceful, hands crossed over the chest, legs straight, head raised slightly. Some of the skeletons were very old, the bones dark with age. Others were newer, still showing skin and clothing. I approached the nearest platform slowly, looking at the remains without touching them. The skeleton was complete, undisturbed, lying exactly as it had been placed. Beside it, arranged carefully on the stone, were personal items: a watch, a wallet, a wedding ring, glasses. "These aren't victims," I said, my voice filled with wonder and confusion. "These are burials, proper, respectful burials." Brennan came up beside me, her flashlight joining mine. "But who would bury people down here, and why?" I moved to another platform. This one held newer remains, a body that had been here perhaps a few months, based on how it looked. The clothing was modern: jeans, a hiking jacket, and near the head, placed with obvious care, was a small bunch of winter berries and pine branches. "Offerings," I whispered. "Someone has been leaving gifts with the dead." Deputy Harris had moved to the edge of the central pit, shining his light down into it. "Dr. Thornton, you need to see this." I joined him at the edge of the pit. It was maybe 15 feet deep, and at the bottom was a pool of water, perfectly still, reflecting our flashlight beams like dark glass. But around the edge of the pit, carved into the stone, were more of those symbols. These were different from the ones in the tunnel, more fancy, more meaningful. They reminded me of something I had seen before in my research. "These are rock carvings," I said, realizing what they were. Similar to ones found at Native American burial sites throughout the Pacific Northwest, these symbols, they are about death, change, and the journey to the afterlife. "So, Native Americans built this place?" Yamamoto asked. "No," I said slowly, studying the carvings more carefully. "These symbols are similar, but not exactly the same. It is like someone learned from Native American traditions, but changed them, created their own burial customs based on what they saw." A sound from deeper in the cave made us all freeze. A low, deep voice sound that echoed off the stone walls. It came from the darkness beyond our lights, from a passage we hadn't noticed on the far side of the cave. "We are not alone," Brennan said quietly, her hand moving to her weapon. The sound came again, closer this time, and then we saw movement in the darkness, a massive shape coming out of the shadows at the edge of our light. It stood at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown hair that seemed to absorb the light from our flashlights. Broad shoulders, long arms, a face that was both human and totally alien. Its eyes reflected our lights with an amber glow, and it watched us with a look that seemed almost sad. A Bigfoot standing there in the cave, looking at us with calmness rather than anger. "Don't move," I said softly. "Nobody make any sudden movements." The creature took a step forward, and I could see it more clearly now. It was old, its fur mixed with gray around the face and shoulders. It moved with a slight limp, favoring its left leg, and in its huge hands It carried something, a body, a human body held carefully in its arms. My heart sank as I recognized the clothing. James Anderson, the park ranger who disappeared 6 days ago. The Bigfoot moved past us without attacking, carrying Anderson's body to one of the empty stone platforms. It laid him down with surprising gentleness, placing his hands across his chest, straightening his legs, adjusting his head to rest comfortably on the stone. It was performing a burial ritual. We stood frozen, watching this impossible scene. The creature worked carefully, removing items from Anderson's pockets, his ranger badge, his compass, his wedding ring, and arranging them beside his body. Then it reached into a leather pouch that hung from its shoulder and pulled out a small bunch of winter berries and evergreen branches, placing them near Anderson's head. When it finished, the Bigfoot stood back, bowed its head, and made a long, low sound that echoed through the cave, a sound of mourning, a sound of respect for the dead. "It is not killing them," I whispered, finally understanding. "It is burying them. It has been burying people who die in these forests for, God, maybe centuries." The Bigfoot turned to look at us, and I saw intelligence in those eyes, understanding. It knew we were watching, it knew we understood, and slowly, on purpose, it pointed around the cave at all the carefully arranged remains, at the gifts, at the symbols carved into stone. Then it pointed at Anderson's body and made a gentle sound. It pointed at its own chest, then at the body again, then made a motion like holding something carefully. "It found him," Brennan said softly. "Anderson must have died from the cold or an accident, and this creature found him, brought him here." The Bigfoot made a sound that meant yes, startlingly human-like. Then it moved to another platform nearby, one that held older remains. It pointed at those bones, then made a motion of walking, then falling, then pointed at its chest again. "The others," I said. "Chen, Kowalski, Foster, they all died out there in the forest. Accidents, the cold, maybe heart attacks or other natural causes. And this creature found them, brought them here to this burial ground. It has been doing this for how long?" The Bigfoot moved to the cave wall where the most detailed carvings were located. It placed its huge hand on the stone, then looked back at us. In that gesture was a story. This place was ancient. This tradition was ancient. Long before European settlers came to these mountains, long before logging towns and hiking trails, something had been collecting the dead from these forests and bringing them to this special place. "The guardian of the bones," Harris whispered, remembering his grandfather's stories. "It is real. It is actually real." The creature watched us for a long moment, then did something that shocked me. It approached slowly, stopping about 10 feet away. Then it kneeled down, lowering itself to look less scary, and it held out one huge hand, palm up, in what could only be seen as a sign of peace. I looked at Brennan. She looked at me. In her eyes, I saw the same conflict I felt. Everything we had been taught said this creature didn't exist. But here it was, showing us something that challenged every guess about what we thought we knew. Slowly, carefully, I took a step forward, then another. The Bigfoot remained still, its hand held out. I could see the details of that hand now. Thick fingers, a palm, with lines just like a human's. Fingernails instead of claws. When I was close enough, I reached out and touched its palm with my own hand. The contact lasted only a moment, but In that moment, I felt something deep. This wasn't a monster. This wasn't some dumb beast. This was a smart being that had its own culture, its own rituals, its own understanding of death and respect for the dead. The Bigfoot pulled its hand back and stood up. It pointed again at the platforms, at all the remains carefully kept in this underground room. Then it pointed up toward the surface and made a sound that seemed to be asking a question. "It wants to know what we are going to do," I said. "If we are going to show this place to everyone, destroy what it has been protecting." I looked around the cave at the proof of decades, maybe centuries, of careful burials, bodies that might otherwise have been lost forever in the wild, their families never knowing what happened. Here they were, kept safe, treated with dignity, honored in death. "The missing people," Brennan said quietly. "Their families deserve to know what happened to them. They deserve closure. But this place," she pointed at the cave, "this is sacred ground, a burial site that has been kept longer than any cemetery in this state." The Bigfoot watched us, waiting. I could see tension in its huge body. It wasn't sure if we would respect what we had found or destroy it. "We take Anderson," I said finally, making a decision I hoped was right. "We can tell his family he died from the cold, that we found his remains and brought him home. We document the others too, identify them if we can, give answers to families who have been waiting. But we don't tell the world about this place. We don't bring cameras and scientists and tourists to destroy what has been protected for so long." The Bigfoot seemed to understand. It moved back to Anderson's platform and carefully picked up the ranger's body, bringing it to me. As it handed over the dead man, our eyes met, and I saw thanks there, trust, and understanding that we would keep its secret. "There is one more thing," I said, looking at the creature. "The recent disappearances. If these people died naturally, we need to understand why. We need to make sure others don't suffer the same fate." The Bigfoot motioned for us to follow, and it led us to another tunnel leading out of the main cave. This tunnel was shorter, and it opened onto a different part of the mountainside, far from where we had entered. And there, carved into rocks and marked with piles of stones, were warnings. "Trail markers," Maria Santos said, looking at them. "These are marking dangerous areas, places where the ground is loose or where the cold is very dangerous." The Bigfoot made a strong motion at these markers, then copied human hikers walking, then falling or collapsing. "It has been trying to stop more deaths," I said, understanding washing over me. "These markers are warnings about dangerous areas. But hikers don't recognize them. They think they are just natural rock piles." The Bigfoot made a yes sound, then pointed strongly at the markers again. It pointed at us, then at the markers, making a motion, as if teaching or explaining. It wanted us to understand these warnings to help other humans recognize them. "The recent group of disappearances," Brennan said slowly. "They all happened in the same general area, an area that has become more popular with hikers in the last year since a new trail guide was published." The creature nodded. It had learned the nod from watching humans. It pointed down the mountain toward where the popular trails must be, then made a motion of many people walking, then pointed at the dangerous ground markers again. More people were coming, ignoring the warnings it had spent generations placing. "We can help with that," I said. "We can work with the Forest Service to mark these areas as dangerous, put up official warnings, that people will recognize and respect. The Bigfoot studied me for a long moment, then made a sound that seemed like acceptance. It had shown us its secret, trusted us with the location of its special burial ground. Now it was asking us to help protect the living, to prevent more people from ending up in that underground room. We carried Anderson's body back through the main cave, and the Bigfoot followed at a respectful distance. As we passed through that huge space filled with the carefully kept remains of decades, I paused to memorize everything I saw. I couldn't take photos. That felt wrong, but I could remember. I could write down what I had learned without showing the location. Before we left, the creature did something unexpected. It moved to one of the platforms holding older remains and picked up a small leather pouch that lay beside the skeletal hand. It brought this to me, pressing it into my hand. Inside were ID cards, old and worn, but still readable, a driver's license from 1978. The name was Gregory Walsh, age 34. I recognized the name. It had been a missing person case from nearly 20 years ago. Never solved. The Bigfoot pointed at the pouch, then at me, then made a motion toward the outside world. It wanted me to take this to give the family peace. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. His family, they will finally know what happened to him. They will have peace. Over the next hour, the Bigfoot brought us IDs from several other remains, always the older ones. Always people whose families had been searching for decades. 9 people in total. 9 cold cases that could finally be closed. 9 families who could finally mourn properly. When we came out of the cave carrying Anderson's body and the precious ID documents, Whitfield and Santos were waiting anxiously at the entrance. The relief on their faces when they saw us was obvious. "We were about to head back for help," Whitfield said. "You have been down there for over 2 hours." We thought. He stopped, staring past us at the massive figure that had followed us out of the cave. The Bigfoot stood at the cave entrance, outlined against the white snow, watching us, making sure we left, making sure we understood the trust that had been placed in us. I turned back one last time and raised my hand in a sign of respect and thanks. The creature raised its own hand in response, then melted back into the shadows of the cave, disappearing from sight. The hike back to the vehicles was silent. We were all thinking about what we had seen, understanding the weight of the secret we now carried. When we finally reached the parking area where Earl was waiting with the dogs, the old handler took one look at our faces and asked no questions. The drive back to Colville was equally quiet. Brennan radioed ahead that we had found Anderson's body, that it appeared to be death by the cold, and that we were bringing him in. She said nothing about the cave, nothing about what else we had found. Back at the sheriff's department, we gathered in the meeting room. The 6 of us who had been in that cave, Brennan, Harris, Yamamoto, Whitfield, Santos, and myself, looked at each other silently, asking the same question. What do we tell people? "We found Anderson dead from the cold," Brennan said finally. "That is the truth. We also found evidence that led us to solve 9 other missing person cases from the past 20 years. We can say we discovered their remains in a remote area of the forest, which is also true. But the exact location is a sacred burial site that needs to be protected," I finished. "We can identify the remains I examined, bring answers to families without revealing the cave's location." "And the creature?" Yamamoto asked quietly. "What creature?" I replied. "I saw tracks in the snow, large tracks, probably from a bear." "That is what I will put in my official report," Harris spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "My grandfather used to say that some secrets are kept not because they are shameful, but because they are sacred. This feels like one of those secrets. We all agreed. The official story would be that we found Anderson and clues leading to other remains. The truth about the burial cave and its guardian would stay with us. Over the next week, I worked on identifying the remains from the ID documents the Bigfoot had provided. Each one was an old case. Families who had been waiting years, in some cases decades, for answers. I contacted them personally, told them we had found their loved ones, that they had died from natural causes in the wild, and that their remains could finally come home. The thanks and relief in their voices was overwhelming. One woman, whose brother had disappeared in 1983, cried on the phone. "We always wondered," she said. "We never gave up hope, but we wondered. Thank you for bringing him home." I worked with the National Forest Service to place official danger warnings in the areas marked by the Bigfoot stone piles. We listed unstable ground, areas prone to sudden weather changes, spots where people could easily get lost. The warnings were placed clearly, and new trail maps were printed with these dangers clearly marked. The disappearances in that area of the Colville National Forest stopped, whether because of the warnings or because the Bigfoot felt its message had finally been heard. I will never know. I returned to my job at the university in Seattle. But I was changed by what I had experienced. I had seen something that challenged everything I thought I knew about the world, about death, and about the creatures we share this planet with. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that cave deep beneath the mountains. I think about the Bigfoot standing guard over those carefully kept remains, performing burial rituals that had been passed down for generations. I think about the smarts and kindness it took to care for the dead of another species, to honor them in death even when their own kind might never know. And I think about the trust it showed us coming out of the shadows, revealing its special place, asking for our help to protect both the dead and the living. I have kept that trust for 27 years now. I have told no one the exact location of that cave. I have written papers on burial practices in the Pacific Northwest, on the importance of caring for the dead, but I have never mentioned what I really found that winter in 1997. But now, as I am getting close to retiring, I feel it is important that the story be told, not the location, never the location, but the truth about what Bigfoot does with human bodies. Not because the creature is a threat or a monster, but because it is the opposite. These beings, these Sasquatch that we have treated as legend and stories, they have been acting as silent guardians of our dead for longer than we can imagine. When people die alone in the wild, when they die from accidents or cold or natural causes far from help, Bigfoot finds them. And instead of leaving them to the weather, instead of allowing their remains to be lost, these creatures perform their own burial rituals. They preserve the dead with dignity. They arrange the bodies carefully, include personal items, leave gifts. They maintain a burial ground that would put many human cemeteries to shame in terms of care and respect. They have been doing this for centuries, asking nothing in return, expecting no praise. They have been the guardian of the bones, just as the old Native American legend said. And they have been trying to prevent more deaths by marking dangerous areas, though their warnings went unnoticed until we learned to see them. The day I touched that Bigfoot's hand in that underground cave, I understood something deep. Intelligence and kindness aren't unique to humans. The ability for ritual, for honoring the dead, for caring about the dead of another species, these things exist in creatures we have dismissed as myths. So yes, I found out what Bigfoot does with human bodies. And the truth is both scary in what it says about what we don't know about the world, and beautiful in what it reveals about the capacity for respect and dignity that exists beyond our species. The Bigfoot of the Cascade Mountains are still out there, still keeping their special burial ground, still watching over those who die in the forests. And now, thanks to our help, fewer people are dying there. The warnings are recognized. The dangerous areas are marked. And somewhere in those mountains, an old Bigfoot with gray fur and a slight limp continues its ancient duty, knowing that at least a few humans understand and respect what it has been doing all along. That is the truth I have carried for 27 years. That is the secret I was told never to share. But I believe the world is ready to know not where, but what. To understand that sometimes the creatures we fear are actually protecting us in ways we never imagined, and that sometimes the most human thing we can do is honor the sacred traditions of those who aren't human at all.